Santana, ooh, I wanna have ya. Tanakas, Fakakta, Jag like Michael Waka, Polanco and Franco. Where'd you go to get into first place? Check Batted, Valdeta, and swinging strike rates. Raisins are shriveled grapes. Here's Adam's happy place.
You know, upon doing my research for today's podcast, I realized that we probably need 3 podcasts dedicated to pitching. But welcome to Fantasy Baseball today on a Kokomo Friday, part 2 of our starting pitcher preview for the 2021 season. Frank Stanfield joined as always by Scott White and Chris Towers. So the goal for today is to get through about 20 to 30 more starting pitchers in ADP. Whatever we don't get to today, we'll do some starting pitcher leftovers next week after our relief pitcher preview. How are we doing, gentlemen? Ready to talk more pitchers? I thought that you guys brought the energy yesterday, which I appreciate. So you ready? You excited?
Yeah. Energy.
No. That's always a fantastic start to the podcast.
I'm going to run through a wall for you, Frank.
I appreciate that. And, you know, let's get things started with Chris today, because I know that he's dying to talk about one Tyler Glasnow. So let's jump right into ADP. And 3 starting pitchers are going in the 5th round. We'll pick up where we left off yesterday. Tyler Glasnow at pick 50, Kenta Maeda at pick 53, Lance Lynn at pick 55. And Tyler Glasnow in particular, he just seems like the ultimate risk-reward play. We know the stuff is nasty. K per 9, up over 14 strikeouts last year, which would have ranked first just ahead of Shane Bieber. But of course, Tyler Glasnow does lack control, and there's a bit of an injury history there. So, Chris, what did you have on Tyler Glasnow that you wanted to let us know?
I guess the first thing would be, are we sure there's that much reward with him? I know he was amazing in 2019, but when we're talking about reward, it's like we talked about with Walker Buehler yesterday. If there are innings concerns, and in Glasnow's case, just like Buehler, I think probably a de facto innings limit, how much upside can there be? That's not even getting into the fact that he had a 4.08 ERA and a 3.66 FIP last season, which are fine. You would be happy with those if you got 14 strikeouts per 9. But unlike most players, when you say, oh, well, 2020 was a small sample size, you can't put too much weight on that. It was a slightly bigger sample size than 2019 in terms of batters faced. He actually faced more batters in 2020 than 2019. So I don't know, if he does 2019 again and throws 140 innings, he's going to be awesome. And he'll probably be worth the top, 15 or 20 rank he's got in ADP at starting pitcher. But I don't think it's worth gambling on.
I'll say 2 things in defense of Tyler Glasnow, who I'm generally not high on. I think he's being overdrafted, but you know, I do think the reward is there. 14.3 K per 9. I mean, that's obviously amazing. The Rays kind of handled their pitching differently from every other organization. It seemed like last year, remember when they were teams were ramping up again in July, we were surprised at how quickly pitchers were getting to 5 and 6 innings. Clearly they weren't starting over from square one, but with Rays pitchers, it seems like they were. They were like the one organization consistently. I guess they made a decision not to have these guys throw that much during the shutdown. So, early on, Glasnow last season was basically limited to 4 innings to start, and it was pretty shaky. And then, once he got a few starts under his belt, he really took off, and the numbers were pretty dominant the rest of the way. I believe he had a strong playoff performance too. So I do think the upside is high, but you look through his history and there are a lot of 4-inning starts mixed in with 7-inning starts, and he pitches for the Rays, who are just inclined to do that sort of thing. We know how much they held Blake Snell back over the past few years. Blake Snell got out of there, but Glasnow is still there. And as careful as they've been with Glasnow, in past seasons, after a season win between the playoffs and the regular season, he threw how many innings? He threw about 90 innings, they're going to be pretty careful with him again. And 150 innings is probably the ceiling.
Yeah. So Scott, to answer your question, I don't think it was a question, but you brought up his postseason. His postseason was actually dreadful for Tyler Glasnow. He allowed 20 earned runs in 28 2/3. That's a 6.28 ERA. The walks were out of control, 5.3 walks per 9 for Glasnow in the postseason. So I think that's part of the risk with him. And of course, he had the forearm injury in 2019, which limited him. So those two things together, I think, are considerable risks. To answer your question, Chris, I do think that his upside is high enough. I think, if everything breaks right, we're talking about a sub-3 ERA with like 12, 13 K per 9. And if he does that over 150 innings, then he's going to pay off. But I just don't.
Right. I just
don't think he's going to get there. So
at SP16, it's just you're drafting him relatively close to his ceiling. And, I will point out, since he came back from that forearm injury, he made 4 September starts in 2019. He made 11 in the regular season and 6 in the postseason. So we're talking about 21 starts. He does have a 10.7% walk rate. We really last year, it did fluctuate a little bit. He was pretty good over the last 6 starts of the regular season. He wasn't great in control early on. And then he was really bad in the postseason. I guess the upside is he could be a top 12 pitcher. But I don't know how much he can outperform his draft prices.
Yeah,
I
probably
think a big question.
Probably with not how much his innings are going to be limited. Is he going to be a top 12 pitcher? So, maybe on a per inning basis, but not overall.
Yeah. Basically, we're all in agreement that Tyler Glasnow is being overdrafted. How about Kenta Maeda? The ADP right now is at 53, is going just behind Tyler Glasnow. And I think he is a little bit not tougher than Glasnow, but he is also tough to evaluate because I think that there are obvious pros and cons here for Maeda. He had a legit pitch mix change last year, which supported what he did. He posted career highs across the board in terms of skill, swinging strike rate, chase rate, ground ball rate, hard contact allowed. He allowed 3 earned runs or less in all 11 of his starts, Kenta Maeda. And then the cons is that you're buying a soon-to-be 33-year-old pitcher coming off a career year. He had a great schedule last season. And outside of the one start where he had a no-hitter going into the 9th, he did not throw more than 94 pitches in a single start. So, Scott, you are the high man on Kenta Maeda. Tell us why.
I am the high man, it seems like, throughout the industry. And part of it is just because of guys I'm moving down. I have workload concerns for Walker Buehler that we've already covered. I have workload concerns for Jack Flaherty, given his age and how much longer he's under team control. So I think most people would be inclined to draft those guys ahead of Maeda. And I have bigger workload concerns for them than I do Maeda. I understand the workload concerns for Maeda. I understand the performance concerns for Maeda, but Maeda was kind of the pitching version of Marcell Ozuna heading into last year, where the supporting numbers made it look like he should have been a lot better than he was. And, the Dodgers were always so weird about how they handled him, moving him in and out of the bullpen, really never giving him a chance to pitch a third time through the lineup, even though his performance third time through the lineup was pretty good. And so I just feel like they kind of, he's the rare pitcher they inhibited. So when, taking takeaways from the short season, if it confirms something I already believed about a player, I'm more likely to believe it. And that's kind of where I am with Maeda, who had an elite swinging strike numbers. You raised the workload concern, Frank, him having low pitch counts throughout that. I think that was partly because he didn't need to throw more pitches than that. Almost all of his starts, all but 3, were 6 innings or more. So he was just so efficient that he wasn't able to accumulate more pitches than that. I think that's more because they didn't want him to pitch more than 6 innings than because he's only capable of throwing 90 pitches in a start. So I don't even worry about that. I look at his game log and see all those 6 inning starts and feel like he's somebody who's going to give you a chance to. He's the kind of pitcher who has a chance to secure a victory every start.
Yeah, and I actually don't mind where he's going. So I'd be all right with getting Kenta Maeda as my, ideally SP3, but if he's your SP2, I think you can do worse than that. Chris, you mentioned on yesterday's podcast that you are in on Lance Lynn, who is now with the Chicago White Sox, was traded there in the offseason. He finished with a 3.32 ERA last season, but his FIP, his xFIP, and his Sierra were all over 4. He kind of has this Chris Bryant thing going on where his underlying numbers are consistently worse than his actual numbers, but he's consistently been solid, and he's a workhorse. So tell everyone why you are excited about Lance Lynn with the White Sox.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm excited about Lance Lynn. There's not a ton that's terribly exciting about him. But that's kind of the point. He seems about as steady as they come right now. And, one of the ways that he outperforms his peripherals, this was especially true last season, but it's always been somewhat true. He does do a good job of limiting damage on batted balls. He had a 317 xWOBA on contact last season. That's obviously elite, but even the year before, that was his highest in the StatCast era, and it was 372. That's pretty good. So, if the strikeout rate stays in the, 26% range that it was in 2020, I still think he can be a really solid pitcher. And he's someone who, when you take into the quality of contact into account with something like xERA, which Baseball Savant uses, he does look better there. And so
Yeah.
it's a bet on him being able to sustain that skill set, and, be, I don't know, maybe the favorite to lead the majors in innings, if not, certainly one of the few who has a chance to throw 200 innings.
I think he did lead the regular season in innings.
He did.
Yeah,
Among
87.
just regular season stats, 84. I've been instinctually, I look at Lance Lynn's numbers and this is a guy I would make out to be a bust. I mean, especially compared to that huge breakout he had in 2019. The K per 9 was down. The swinging strike rate was down. The xFIP rose to 434. You talk about xERA, which takes into account quality of contact in a way xFIP doesn't. And I'm generally distrustful of that and distrustful of xERA in general as a predictor stat, as opposed to one that reflects what actually happened. I think xERA reflects what already happened better than xFIP does, but it doesn't predict what's to come as well as xFIP does. So I'm kind of scared of that 434 xFIP for Lynn. But ultimately, what it comes down to for me is he might be, outside of those first round type pitchers, the single pitcher who you can feel confident isn't going to have workload concerns coming off the shortened season. He's old. He's not on a long-term deal, and he just has a history of piling up innings. So, if he's even just decent, a strikeout per inning, an ERA, south of 4 is probably going to give you a solid return on investment.
And I agree on the being skeptical of xERA. Pitchers don't have as much control over their quality of contact as hitters do, but Lance Lynn actually is kind of Kyle Hendricks-esque in that regard. He has a 359 career xWOBA on contact. Kyle Hendricks is 349. Kyle Hendricks is the king of that, but I think it's a legitimate skill for Lance Lynn that helps him outperform his peripherals.
Scott, the numbers that you brought up for Lance Lynn, you said an ERA just south of 4, would be solid. That sounds a lot like Jose Barrios and Zach Wheeler, who I think are similar pitchers where they're workhorses, but we're not really expecting them to be these awesome, like ERA and WHIP guys. I just don't know that Lance Lynn is that much different than those type of pitchers.
Well, I think he's workhorsier. I think he's more reliable for big innings count than those guys. And I think he's, I was stipulating a strikeout per inning too. And I think Barrios and Wheeler, you're taking the under on that. Yeah. So yeah, I do like Lynn more than those two.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to have much Lance Lynn, but I understand why someone would like him. Kenta Maeda is my favorite from that group, though, overall. Let's go into the 6th round, and the next 3 off the board. Corbin Burns at pick 61, Hyunjin Ryu at pick 65, and Max Fried at pick 67. We'll start things off with Corbin Burns, who was phenomenal last year. He finishes the SP12 in Roto, the SP18 in head-to-head points, 2.11 ERA, 102 WHIP, 13.3 K per 9 across 59 2/3 innings pitched, changed up his pitch mix, And the Brewers have already said that they are hoping their starting pitchers jump their innings by 100. So based on last year, I mean, that's going to put him right around 160. If he gives you mid threes ERA with, 12 K per nine and 160 strikeouts, Corbin Burnes is going to be really, really damn good. Chris, I've got to call you out for something. I know you like Ian Anderson, but you have him ranked higher than Corbin Burnes. And I tried to figure it out, and I can't, because I think if you're worried about the innings for both of them, I just think Corbin Burnes is a better pitcher at this point.
I don't think I have. Do I have Corbin Burnes ranked lower?
It might have been head-to-head in head-to-head points leagues. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I do.
You have some really solid pitchers ranked behind Ian Anderson. I know, to get Ian Anderson up in your top 25.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not a knock against any of those guys, and maybe I have Ian Anderson a little too high, and I have no problem moving, those guys around. I don't think of, rankings as static. I look at it more like an electron cloud, where you got an area, and guys can be in any different part of that area at any given time. The one thing I will say about Corbin Burnes, small sample size of his 2020 season. Look up electron clouds; it'll blow your mind. They don't make sense with our understanding of the physical world. Small sample size on his 2020 success. However, the small sample, the sample of him being, the worst pitcher in baseball in 2019 was actually slightly smaller. He faced 5 more batters in 2020 than he did in 2019. He was the Brewers organizational pitcher of the year in 2017 as a prospect, and he's kind of got the innings in his, track record, or at least he's got the workload.
Oh, a long time ago, though, right? We're talking several years ago.
145 in 2017. He was at
a long time ago at this
2018. He was at 116, but that was making 30 appearances out of the bullpen. I think the bigger thing to take away from it is I don't think it doesn't seem like there's been a point where he's missed much time in the last 4 seasons. And given that he's already thrown 145 innings, the fact that he has not had many, if any, injury concerns, and just the fact that the stuff is just stupid dominant, might be best in baseball, makes me buy into Corbin Burnes. Yeah, I might move him up over Ian Anderson. I think that's fine.
Let's get Corbin Burnes up the rankings there, Chris. It sounds like you like it.
If you'll indulge, if you and the audience will indulge me for a second, Frank, I wasn't listening when you gave your tidbit about Corbin Burnes' innings and what the Brewers are going to do. What was that again? Because it's going to impact what I think, probably.
Okay, so you basically pulled a Frank. You weren't listening while I was talking, which is fine because I do it all the time. But so he pitched 59 2/3 last year, and the Brewers have come out and said they want to push their starting pitchers 100 more innings than they pitched last year. So that would put him on a projection of about 160 for this season.
Okay. That was on the more optimistic end of what I was thinking, for sure. So that helps. But the point I was going to make with Corbin Burnes is this is where you get into the range of the starting pitcher rankings where it really becomes about skill versus volume, and that being a bigger issue than ever before because of the weird season we just had. And Corbin Burnes, 160 is still less than what you want from one of your top pitchers. It's better than 120 or something that I was thinking it could be. So I'm encouraged overall, but it's still not what you're going to get from a Steven Strasburg, provided he stays healthy, a Zach Greinke, Kyle Hendricks. These are all guys that I have in the same tier. And obviously, I think Burnes is the most talented of that group, but is he going to have the biggest fantasy impact given the concerns over workload? I'm not sure. I don't have all those guys ranked ahead of him. He's kind of in the middle of that list of names I just gave. But I would not feel so comfortable with Burnes as like my number 2. I think he'd have to be my number 3 at best.
I agree. That's exactly what I was going to ask is, how many pitchers do you need to have at this point? Because for me, I need 2. Once you start to get into this range of Burnes, Ryu, Fried, the next group that we'll talk about, Sonny Gray, Carlos Carrasco, Steven Strasburg, they're all fine pitchers, but they all come with considerable downside and risk as well. So at this point, I need at least 2 starting pitchers. I'd be looking for one of these guys as my SP3 in a draft. Scott, we'll stick with you here. Hyunjin Ryu and Max Fried going just behind Corbin Burns. What do you think of the price tag here going in the 6th round?
So I think Max Fried's overrated. He was one of my favorites last year. Of course, pitches for my favorite team. But I think people look at his 7-0 record. They look at his very low ERA last year, and they think, all right, this guy has arrived as an ace. He had a 2.25 ERA. There are a couple reasons I'm not sharing that sentiment. He had some pretty notable skills regression last year in terms of missing bats. It was only 8 K per 9. That's certainly not ace caliber. His xFIP rose to 405 from 332 in 2019 to 405. And the other requirement, even the workload, he wasn't really delivering in that regard. He had 4 starts that were 6 innings or more, none 7 innings. But he was basically a 5-inning pitcher last year, Max Fried was. So it's kind of amazing he won 7 games considering. I don't think he's going to be a bust. Like, he's such a good ground ball pitcher, and he's competent at so many other things that I think he's going to be fine. But like him versus Kyle Hendricks, who had more 7-inning starts, he tied for the major league lead in 7-inning starts last year. Like, I don't know why you would want Fried more than Kyle Hendricks. That just unless you're just counting on improvement.
Nobody ever wants Kyle Hendricks.
Well, I think
nobody ever wants Kyle Hendricks.
I think they should more than ever now. And I think especially unless you're thinking Fried is going to get better, and I'm willing to bet on that. And I'm not willing to do that. I think statistically he's going to take a step back, and he's going to be another young pitcher with workload concerns.
He was outlier great on quality of contact last season in a way that he'd never been before. So
he had to be.
I think that's the
ERA.
concern. Like his barrel rate in 2019 and 2020 were really good, but 2020 was on another level entirely. And if he can't sustain that, and given the sample size, I think there's definitely concerns about it. I don't know if he has enough swing and miss in his profile to sustain the improvement that he appeared to make.
Hyunjin Ryu, we haven't really spoke about much, but he has pitched 807 1/3 innings in his career. He has a 2.95 ERA and a 1.16 WHIP. He fared very well in his first stint with the Blue Jays. He was a top 21 pitcher in both roto and head-to-head points. And the Blue Jays will start their season in Dunedin. I got that right now. I know a couple of weeks ago we messed it up royally, but in Dunedin, according to Derek Carty, it is actually slightly more hitter-friendly than Buffalo, where the Blue Jays played last year. I just don't think it matters. I mean, Hyunjin Ryu is solid. It's just a matter of him staying on the field.
Yep.
He's turning 34 years old. I'm not sure that I'm ready to call him durable yet, but when he's on the mound, he's amazing. So
I love getting Hyunjin Ryu. I wish he was as undervalued this year as he was last year.
Yeah.
I'm not getting him as much as I did then, but here's a fun fact for you. Over the last 3 seasons, where do you think Hyunjin Ryu ranks among starting pitchers in ERA over the last 3 years?
Got to be number 2.
Number 2 behind Jacob deGrom.
It's really good.
Yeah, it's like 2.3 or something. It's outrageously low.
His highest ERA over the last 3 years was 2.69 last year.
Yeah.
The combined numbers exactly 2.3. Yeah.
God, I'm so good.
Let's continue in the 6th round. It's a very popular round. There are 3 more starting pitchers going, according to ADP over at Fantasy Pros, and that includes Sonny Gray at pick 68, Carlos Carrasco, who is now with the New York Mets, at pick 69, and Steven Strasburg at pick 70. Sonny Gray, Chris, to me, he is very confusing because the swinging strike rate does not support as many strikeouts as he gets. The walks are always an issue, over 3 walks per 9 for 5 straight seasons. Where are we at on Sonny Gray?
I think he's fine. I think, one of the problems with drafting him is he's one of the older guys who you don't really think can get to 180 innings. I don't think he's done that in a normal season in a while, because the Reds breakout season even was not that much. I think
he has not done that since 2015, Chris.
Yeah, I think he's really solid. I think he'll get a decent number of strikeouts, but I think there's a ceiling, and I don't know. He's fine.
Scott, we did
I haven't drafted him yet.
Yeah, I was just about to say we did a mock draft today where I got Sonny Gray as my SP3 in round 6, and I had Kershaw and Jack Flaherty as my first 2 starting pitchers. So it's not the best, but I didn't think it was terrible either. I don't know. I don't feel great about Sonny Gray.
I don't either. Yeah, I mean, it looked like at the start of last year he had picked up where he left off with that amazing into 2019, and then suddenly the swinging strikes disappeared, and then he had a back issue, wasn't it? And then when he came back, the swinging strikes weren't back, and he's just put us through so much. Sonny Gray's put us through so much over the years, jerking us around. And I think at this point I'd rather have Zach Wheeler. How much later does Zach Wheeler go?
Zach Wheeler is
like 25 picks later. Zach Wheeler goes, and I think I just rather take the predictability of Zach Wheeler than the potential headache of Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray clearly has more strikeout potential, but you're going to be fine with Zach Wheeler. I think, especially if you're talking about as like your number 4 starter or something. This is.
I don't disagree, and I think I have Zach Wheeler higher than consensus. It is weird that Zach Wheeler's the boring, safe, he'll just throw him out there and he'll get a mid-3s ERA and throw 190, and it's like, well, he's been that for 2 years in a row. He'd never even been close to that before, and he missed like 2 full seasons recovering from Tommy John surgery, and even the 2 good seasons, it's been like wildly fluctuating style. But I do agree with you. It's just, it's weird that we feel
it's 3 seasons in a row, Chris.
Yeah, 3.
If we're counting the really short one,
2 real seasons where 2 seasons where he's done he hasn't quite reached 200 innings, but he's been like right at the cusp, I think.
180, 182, 195, 71 last year.
Yeah, Zach Wheeler is 12th in innings pitched since 2018. So that's pretty good.
We're jumping way ahead in ADP to get to him, which is kind of my point. Like I think Sonny Gray belongs down at his level, and yet we're talking about Sonny Gray alongside Carlos Carrasco is right behind Sonny Gray in ADP, and I like Carlos Carrasco so much more.
Yeah, we're all pretty excited, I believe, on Carrasco. Scott has him at SP15. I have him at SP16. Chris has him at SP16. So we are all in alignment there. We have him higher than ADP. And Carrasco, his first 6 starts in 2020 were a little shaky, which I think is somewhat expected. He was coming back from leukemia the year before in 2019. But a 4.50 ERA, 15 walks in those first 6 starts. 4.5 walks per 9. That's not what we're used to seeing from Carrasco. And then his final 6 starts, he was like Carrasco of old. 1.66 ERA, 103 WHIP. He went at least 6 innings in each of those starts. He went 7 innings in 2 of those. Got the walks down to 2.8 per 9. Swinging strike rate was right where it needs to be. The velocity was right where it needs to be. I love Carrasco. I mean, I guess there's risk for someone at his age, Scott, but
there's risk for every pitcher.
I think you can say that about anyone. Yeah.
Right. Age is like, pitcher is the one position where I don't worry about how old they are that much, because it's like there are so many things that could take a player down, and unless they're showing signs of decline, pitchers tend. I just don't think that's as big of a concern there as it is at some other position, because it's there are so many risk factors anyway. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure what the concern would be for Carrasco after what he showed last year. The stuff was completely intact. His ability to work deep into games was completely intact. Everything seemed fine. And I say that as a guy who was really concerned about how he'd recover from that leukemia battle, how he'd reacclimate himself as a starting pitcher. And I was just blown away by it. And so given his track record, his stability from year to year, guy who pitches a lot of innings and gets a lot of strike, like he seems exactly the sort of player we should be elevating coming off that weird season where we don't really know what to expect from so many pitchers. Carrasco, I feel very secure with.
And now he goes to the National League where he doesn't have to face the DH anymore.
Yeah. So it improves his ERA chances too. Yeah.
That only helps him. The season before he had leukemia, which you kind of give him a pass for because of the workload there, he went 192 in 2018 and 200 innings in 2017. So, yeah, I agree. I think we can depend on Carrasco for workload. Steven Strasburg, Chris, I know that I believe you're interested in Steven Strasburg. And year in and year out, his ADP is like a roller coaster. So it's like 1 year he gets hurt and he burns you. You draft him early that year, he gets hurt, he burns you. The next year, you get him at a discount, he's awesome. Then you draft him high again the next year, he gets hurt that year. You get him at a discount the following year. You look at his ADP the last 5 years, starting in 2017, 52, then 25, 59, then 29. That was last year. And now he's down at 70. So I don't usually include emails here, but we got this one from Scott in Chicago, and I thought it was useful. He wrote in, Maria Torres, who covers the Nationals for The Athletic, reported this on Strasburg's carpal tunnel surgery. Quote, the 15-minute procedure immediately ended the numbness he felt in his right thumb and hand. He hasn't had issues since. Because of the extra, in this case, shortened season, he began his full off-season program early and is a full go in camp. So, like everyone else that we're talking about here, Chris, if you get Strasburg as your SP3, I don't really think there's much downside.
Yeah, I think and look, I think you can just look at his ADP over those years and kind of guess which years I've liked Steven Strasburg and which years I haven't. The most profitable thing you could do in fantasy baseball over the last 4 years seemingly has been fade Steven Strasburg when his ERA is his ADP is high and buy him when it's low. This year, it's a much bigger question mark because we don't really have a track record of starting pitchers coming back from, a carpal tunnel type of injury and procedure. That doesn't sound like it was a serious procedure. It was 15 minutes. That seems, I don't know how long it takes to do sutures, but that seems like a pretty short time. But I just don't know. Like I legitimately, it's just an unknown. I have him as SP17. So I am more likely to draft Steven Strasburg than most people, I think. He's 59th in my overall rankings. Generally, my starting pitchers are lower than the ADP. So I think it's worth the gamble because he should be really good if he's okay.
Those were two very encouraging sentences to me, the ones you read off there, Frank, because it does really downplay the procedure and how quickly he bounced back from it and the immediacy of him regaining the feeling. That kind of makes me want to move him up to just behind Brandon Woodruff, I think. Yeah, I don't know that it really benefits me to do that before I see him make a spring start. If he's throwing like Strasburg, that should relieve a lot of concerns right there too.
Yeah, the ADP will skyrocket if he looks all right in the spring. If he looks normal Strasburg, he's pumping 93, 94, the breaking stuff looks all right, no issues, you're going to see his ADP jump up to like the 4th round. But that is something to pay attention to throughout spring with Steven Strasburg. We get into the 7th round now in ADP. Zach Plesac at pick 78, Kyle Hendricks at pick 79, and Jose Berrios at pick 81. We heard from Chris yesterday who had Zach Plesac as a bust, but for Plesac last season, he averaged 21.4 fantasy points per game. That was 3rd best among starting pitchers, but of course, it came with a super small sample size, just 8 starts in a really strong schedule for Zach Plesac. So, Scott, I know that you're a fan of Plesac. I will give you the next minute, starting right now, to tell everyone why.
So it's kind of an upside argument for Plesac. Basically, there are very few starting pitchers that I think perform up to a standard that makes them worthwhile. And very few pitchers every year perform up to that standard these days. Plesac was the 2nd best pitcher in head-to-head points per game last year. And part of the reason he accomplished that is because of how deep he was pitching into games. He went 7 innings or more consistently than any pitcher. He didn't have a single start where he went less than 6 innings. He was an elite strike thrower. The walk rate was down. He actually changed his pitch mix in a significant way. He kind of remade himself as a pitcher, which it helps me believe the skills improvement over a small sample more. I wish it was a bigger sample. Obviously, I'd feel more comfortable if it was, but I like that he has already shown, if he is good, if it was more or less legitimate. Obviously, he's not going to have a 2.28 ERA again, but if he has a 3.28 ERA, if it was more or less legitimate, we know he's going to be a guy who takes on a big workload from start to start, puts himself in a position for wins, really makes those ratios hold up, and or play up, I should say. And yeah, that's like I think the risk is worth the reward at this point, I guess.
Mercy!
30 seconds over your time limit, Scott. How dare you? Chris, remind everyone, I will give you a chance to rebut Scott's love for Zach Plesac.
He was 404th overall in ADP a year ago, and he made 8 starts against 5 different teams, all of whom were in the AL or NL Central. You can keep your time.
I do want to add. I do want to make one other point that I think is really what sold me completely on Plesac. So he came out of the gate with 3 awesome starts, the caliber of what they all ended up being last year, right? And then remember, he got sent down to the minors for a month for violating team rules. A month. Really contentious situation. Like if there's going to be something that throws a guy off his game, it's that. And yet he came back twirling those exact same kind of starts that he did in the first.
Well,
so it wasn't a momentum situation. It wasn't anything like that. He actually his season was derailed, and yet he picked up right where he left off.
I mean, the strikeout rate was way lower, and I'm pretty sure the swinging strike rate was lower as well.
He had an
after
11
he came back.
strikeout game.
Right, he had the one, but his overall strikeout rate was 25.5%. I believe it was. Gosh, I'm not going to do that on the top of my head, but it was close to 30% before that. I just look. I'm being overly dismissive. I have him as my SP30, so I don't. It's not like I hate Zach Plesac. We don't know, like, yes, there were pitch mix changes and all this. We don't know what it looks like when the league adjusts to him because the league hasn't had a chance to adjust to him.
Of course we
And
don't know.
We have a
Of course we
long
don't
track
know.
record of him being fine, perfectly fine, like
I-
7th guy in your organization while being old for every minor league level. And everything rides on those 8 innings or those 8 starts. Everything.
I equate Plesac this year to Lance Lynn last year, where it's like, if he is legitimately this good, there are so few pitchers who are capable of doing anything close to this that it's worth the gamble. And if it doesn't work out, you know what? You're not drafting him as your number 1. You're not drafting him as your number 2.
But
It'll be
before
okay.
before 2019, Lance Lynn had 1,100 major league innings with a 3.57 ERA.
But nobody wanted Lance Lynn in fantasy.
Right, but
2
maybe
years prior.
but maybe
to
that just
2019.
means But maybe that just means that we were wrong about him. I don't necessarily means that
Why would you want the numbers he put up?
he's only had 1 season with an ERA above 4. Lance Lynn, he was really good. He was just underrated.
Mm.
Whereas I like. The thing with Zach Plesac, you have to basically ignore his entire career except for 8 starts, and I can't do that. If someone else wants to do that, that's fine. If I'm wrong, I'm fine. with that.
Doesn't he have like a total of 20 starts or something? He's not.
Well, plus the minors,
Well, he was really good in the minors.
but not in the same way. He
Okay.
wasn't nearly the strikeout guy he was last season. He was a good control guy, but I think people think of him as like the next Shane Bieber, perhaps like a light like diet Shane Bieber. He didn't have nearly as good control as Shane Bieber in the minors either. Like it's 8 starts. He didn't. No, Shane Bieber had like a 1. I looked at it the other day. Shane Bieber's walk rate was like half of Zach Plesac's in the minors.
But Zach Plesac was really good. It just wasn't superhuman.
Yeah.
like
Right, but
Bieber's.
that's the thing. When you're looking at Shane Bieber, you also have like Zach Plesac's peripherals over the course of his major league career aren't particularly good as well, where Shane Bieber's were really good.
I will
So I
just
just-
point out for Plesac, his final 3 minor league stops, his walks per 9 were below 1.7 at each one of those stops. So it was really good. But yeah, if you agree with Scott, then you're going to be willing to draft Plesac. If you're more like Chris, then you're probably not going to wind up with him. this season. Kyle Hendricks seems like he's getting a little bit more respect, maybe not the full respect that he deserves. The ERA for Kyle Hendricks over the last 5 seasons, 2.13, 3.03, 3.44, 3.46, and 2.88 last season. He has never had a whip higher than 1.19. I think people just push him down the board because he doesn't get a bunch of strikeouts, but that's fine. I mean, if you know how to construct your roster to get Kyle Hendricks, then you should be all right. But
projection systems don't like him. That's a big part of it too, is that everyone's default rankings start with him so low because projection systems never like him because he always outperforms his peripherals.
yeah, I mean, I trust it at this point.
It's going to end at some point, but yeah.
It doesn't look like it's going to end at least this upcoming season.
I'll just want to throw in one reason why I like Hendricks more now than in years past. I think David Ross handles him like Joe Madden had weird issues with Hendricks, and he would pull him really early in games just randomly, like as famously happened in the World Series. Right, there was a lot of that over Joe Madden's tenure with the Cubs, and David Ross didn't seem to play those games with Kyle Hendricks, so that's part of it too.
Yeah, for Kyle Hendricks, he made 12 starts last season. He went 6+ in 10 of them. So it's pretty impressive, especially, and man, he had his final 4 starts. He went 7 2/3 or more in all 4 of them. That is insane for Kyle Hendricks. Jose Barrios, we haven't really spoke much about. I think he's kind of boring at this point. The velocity spike was interesting last year. His 94.3 mile per hour fastball velocity was a career high for Jose Barrios. But I think at this point we know who he is. He's like a mid to high 3s ERA. He has the 9th most innings since 2018. So he kind of fits that workhorse mold. Chris, is anyone excited to draft Jose Barrios? I don't know.
This is a comp I've made a few times. He's kind of like a sexier Kyle Hendricks. He doesn't have nearly the control Kyle Hendricks does, but the biggest way Barrios stands out is by limiting quality of contact. I don't know. I think he's been overrated for most of his career as a fantasy player, and I think now he's properly rated.
The worst argument Chris and I have ever had on this show was over Jose Barrios, but I
was right.
You were right. I was about to say I concede to Chris that I don't
all
think
it takes is 4 years of evidence for Scott to concede a point to me. That's all it takes.
Yeah.
So, Chris, between you compared Jose Barrios and Kyle Hendricks, who would you rather have between the two?
I have Kyle Hendricks 10 spots higher in the overall rankings. So Kyle Hendricks, 2 spots in the pitcher rankings.
Just want to quickly promote a few things. Thanks to everyone who is watching. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can hit that little bell, so every time we go live, you get a notification. That's youtube.com/fantasybaseballtoday. And make sure you follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/CBS Sports HQ. Go join our Facebook group and be part of our community of fans who are interacting each and every day. In fact, a gentleman named Brian Williams called Chris Towers the, quote, basher of brevity today. Would you like to defend yourself, Chris?
I mean, listen to my Zach Plesac rebuttal. You can have the rest of your time.
I appreciate it. You can also be part of our weekly Q&As. We've been doing Scott Mondays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. I am on our Facebook group at Tuesdays at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. Chris, Wednesdays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. That's facebook.com/groups/fantasy-baseball today. If you're watching on the video side, don't go anywhere. If you're listening to the podcast, we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll have more ADP next. Alrighty, we move on to the 8th round of a 12-team league in ADP. This is according to Fantasy Pros, of course. 3 more going off the board. Dinelson Lamet at pick 85, Zach Wheeler at pick 93, and Zach Greinke, the 2 Zachs here, at pick 97. Scott, you spoke about Dinelson Lamet yesterday, who you have as a bust, and he was awesome last year. He was a top 10 pitcher in both head-to-head points leagues and Roto. The guy was absolutely ridiculous, but he dealt with biceps tightness towards the end of last season. Again, this is Dinelson Lamet, and that is on the same arm that he's already had Tommy John surgery on. So he's kind of a time bomb.
He showed up to spring training saying if he had continued pitching last season, doctors told him he would have likely needed Tommy John surgery again. It's like, that is, if you weren't already scared, that should be enough to do it, right? Because it obviously wasn't a long season. It wasn't a full length season that he was trying to make it through. So I'm sure there is a point where if Lamet fell far enough, I would take him. I just don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening. He's might be the pitcher I'm least likely to draft at this point. Too scared. Too scared.
I'm also just not sure he's that good.
Yeah.
But he's definitely not 209 ERA good. But we're talking about a one pitch pitcher. He's got a fastball that he throws really hard, but it doesn't get whiffs. It gets hit really hard. He was someone who had really bad quality of contact numbers before 2020 was last year. So there is like zero margin for error for him.
We've seen pitchers find great success throwing a slider as often as he does, which I think is more than half the time. But that, last year, there aren't many pitches that are more taxing on the elbow than the slider. And obviously, for it to be effective, you have to throw it with a lot of conviction. We've heard about pitchers coming off elbow injuries and being kind of scared to throw their slider. We saw it with Griffin Canning last year. So it's like that's another reason why, even if Lamet makes it, it's just something else to worry about.
Yeah. Dinelson Lamet threw his slider 53% of the time last year. That was by far the most among qualified starting pitchers. Clayton Kershaw was the next closest. He threw his slider 40% of the time. So, it's just kind of absurd how much Dinelson Lamet used it last year. Scott, who do you prefer between the Zachs, Zach Wheeler and Zach Greinke?
I think I prefer Greinke. Double checking my rank. Yeah, I prefer Greinke by a few spots. Definitely a higher end track record there. I do worry. Zach Greinke is what, 38 now, 37?
He is 37 years old. Yep.
Yeah. And his velocity was down again last year. And
it was like really down, Scott. So 2019, 90 miles per hour on his fastball, which already is not great. Last year, it was 87 miles per hour. And before people say, well, he's a slow starter, this always happens to him. His velocity in his first 12 starts in 2019, 89.4 miles per hour. So like way.
And like every spring, it was kind of a joke. Zach Greinke would come in, throw an 84 and everybody would freak out and then it would be fine. So, the fact that his ERA jumped from 293 to 403, along with that drop in velocity, it makes it harder to defend that drop in velocity. And yet his xFIP was 351, completely in line with the past few years. I'm inclined to believe he's okay. Obviously, I'm not ranking him in my top 15 the way I would have every year in the past. So I have some concerns, but I think where he's going, you don't have to worry about the downside so much based on where he's going.
Anything you'd like to add, Chris?
Money printer, go Burr. Draft Zach Greinke. The money printer has been going Burr for like a decade. Just keep doing it.
Yeah.
Like if you look at his like underlying numbers,
no, they're all in line with where he's been.
You would not know that he lost 3 miles per hour on his fastball. And so that makes me wonder why I should care.
Yeah.
Like if it didn't really make him less effective, ERA aside, all the component parts, I just I don't know. It's Zach Greinke.
It's a very good point. I know the experience of having Zach Greinke and contending with that 403 ERA. It was disappointing. It was the first time I felt disappointed in Zach Greinke, what he did for my fantasy team, And so you look at that ERA, you look at the velocity, and you're like, all right, maybe this is the beginning of the end. But you're right. ERA is not normally a number we value on the same level of those other ones that look totally fine for Greinke. So,
especially in 67 innings, because ERA is so volatile.
Exactly. Yeah. You're kind of making me think I'm too low on Greinke.
He was good in the playoffs too, wasn't he?
Yeah, I'm not going to own much Zach Greinke this year. It's kind of like my Max Scherzer. So yeah, I'm gonna remain consistent with my anti-oldies. Zach Wheeler is someone that I actually do like. We mentioned him at least 5 2/3 in all 11 starts last season. And people might be worried about the strikeouts. His K/9 was under 7 last year, it looks gross. But his 10.8% swinging strike rate was actually a career high. So I would expect the strikeouts to bounce back a little bit for Zach Wheeler. He also had a career high 56% ground ball rate, which you like to see, especially pitching in Citizens Bank Park. We move just past pick 100 now in ADP, and we get to Jesus Luzardo at pick 101, Ian Anderson at pick 102, and Chris Paddock at pick 103. Chris, I know that you are a big fan of Ian Anderson. Jesus Luzardo, we were also excited about him last year. He managed to stay healthy, but did not really deliver. And I kind of feel like the A's are going to continue to kind of handle him with kids' gloves this season. So I'm a little tentative when it comes to Luzardo.
Yeah, I've got him around this range. He's SP 32 for me. He's SP 31 in ADP. I think there's a chance he just breaks out and has an awesome season, and we just kind of look silly for not being as excited as we should have been, because the fundamentals of what we liked about Jesus Luzardo haven't changed. If anything, we should feel more confident that he can be a really good major league pitcher after watching him be good, but also I think the workload was a little better than I thought it would be. He threw 90 pitches a handful of times. This is someone who I think in his entire professional career, and presumably going back to high school, had thrown 90 pitches one time in a professional start before last season. He did it 4 times, including I think once on his third start or something like that. So I'm pretty excited about Jesus Luzardo.
Scott,
I
who do you
expected more strikeouts. It's the only thing. I thought that was going to be a cinch for him, getting strikeouts, good 3-pitch mix. But for a rookie season, it obviously wasn't bad.
Chris, Scott, who do you prefer between Ian Anderson and Jesus Luzardo? Because it kind of feels like we might have workload concerns for both of them.
Yeah,
so kind of lump them together here.
I mean, you would normally for a pitcher just beginning his career. They were both rookies last year. And I put Sixto Sanchez. It's really kind of a group of 3 second-year pitchers who pitched great as rookies. Ian Anderson was obviously the best. Ian Anderson showed the most strikeout potential. Ian Anderson is the one I like the most. I do like Ian Anderson a lot. Not quite as much as Chris does, because I think there's virtually no chance he throws more than I'd be surprised if he got to 150 innings, Ian Anderson. But he dominated a lot of really strong lineups as a rookie. And the only thing you could really point to as a problem are the walks for Ian Anderson. But I rarely do the eye test thing, but I saw a lot of Ian Anderson starts last year, and it's just, you come away from an Ian Anderson start feeling better about his control, because while the walk rate may have been high, he featured both of his secondary pitchers. He threw his fastball less than half the time. He was throwing his changeup 30% of his time, the curveball 20% of the time. It's rare to see a young pitcher with that much confidence in his pitches, and he was so in command with them. The way he dropped that loopy curveball in for a strike, I saw him do that so often. It was just you don't see that from a young pitcher very often. And then the changeup we talked about yesterday is just Luis Castillo level in terms of getting whiffs.
And he doesn't have the injury track record of Sixto Sanchez or especially Jesus Luzardo.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's a feather in the cap there for one, Ian Anderson. Chris Paddock is my pitcher version of Austin Meadows. I'm going to have a lot of shares of Chris Paddock this year, and it's really just betting on talent for me. He regressed big time in 2020. A lot of it had to do with his fastball. According to AJ Casavel, who covers the Padres for MLB.com, Paddock was getting 2-seam run on his fastball last year, which caused the pitch to leak over the heart of the plate more frequently, and it got hit hard. His batting average against, his slugging percentage against, it was all way up on his fastball, on Paddock's fastball last year versus in 2019. So he basically went from being a 2.5 pitch pitcher as a rookie to a 1-pitch pitcher. He only had his changeup working last season. So considering what the Padres were able to get out of Dinelson Lamet and his fastball, I think that they're going to be able to get Paddock back on track there. And I would expect something closer to his rookie year, maybe like a mid-3s ERA, a really good whip, over a strikeout per inning, obviously good run support with the Padres. So I don't know where you guys are at on Paddock, but just in general, I'm higher on him versus ADP.
Yeah, and those are all good points. And I don't know. He was so bad last year. I've been reluctant to move him up. I do have him higher than his ADP. I know I have him ahead of Ian Anderson and Jesus Luzardo. I have him ahead of that group. I have him like where Barrios is. But it always seems like somebody in the draft's higher on Paddock than I am. So I've just never really had to think about drafting him.
I wish the changeup was better.
Yeah.
Like so
mean-
far,
you mean
the
the curveball?
changeup's just what?
You mean the curveball, Chris?
No, the changeup. Like he doesn't have the Luis Castillo changeup, and Castillo has a better fastball and a better third pitch. So, like the changeup's been good, but it doesn't get a ton of whiffs.
Is that kind of diminishing returns because he throws it so much, Paddock? I don't know how much he threw it last year.
He threw it 31% last year. He doesn't really throw it all
Yeah.
that much. So just for
That's a lot, but
context,
it's not
I mean,
like 50%.
Yeah, the small sample size caveats apply, but Ian Anderson's was at 40% last season.
Okay.
And so, that's usually where Castillo's is. And so I think he'll be better. I have him one spot in the pitcher rankings ahead of his ADP or where his ADP is in the pitcher rankings, but I don't think I've drafted him this year.
Yeah. This is kind of like the cutoff for me where usually I like to have 4 of my top 30 starting pitchers. I think Paddock is maybe right at 30 for me or right inside my top 30. So he is the one where I like to have 4 starting pitchers at this point in the draft.
My cutoff includes the next 2 in ADP, Frank.
Well, let's talk about those 2. We're getting into the round 9-10 range here. Framber Valdez at pick 104, Dylan Bundy at pick 110, and then Charlie Morton at pick 116. Scott, I know that you are a big fan of Framber Valdez. So look at you, man. You're buying the small sample size pitchers, Framber Valdez and Zach Plesac. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost makes it easy to do. The cost is, it's kind of like what I was saying for Plesac. If they are as good as they showed last year, then they're going to be a great value here, and they're definitely going to be among the group of pitchers that are the most valuable assets in fantasy. For Framber Valdez, there's 2 things I love about him. Far and away the best ground ball pitcher last year. And really, all the times we've seen him in the past, that was something Valdez was really good at. It's why I flirted with him in fantasy even prior to last year. He just had some inconsistencies, some control issues that did not bring him down finally for the first time last year. And for being such a ground ball pitcher, the fact he gets a strikeout per inning, more than a strikeout per inning, you don't see that a lot from people who are that good at getting ground balls. The other thing I like about Framber Valdez is that, we've talked, I think I mentioned Kyle Hendricks tied for the major league lead in number of 7-inning starts last year. He tied with Yu Darvish, and he tied with Framber Valdez. And I don't know if it's going to lead to harm problems down the road for Framber Valdez, but clearly Dusty Baker likes getting length out of him. And that is half the battle for starting pitchers these days. There's performance, and then there's getting length out of your starts. And we know Framber Valdez has that second box checked. So if he can keep the walks down and pick up where he left off last year, he's going to be very valuable at this stage of the draft. I often get him as my number 5 guy. So, I could live with him failing at that point. And if he doesn't fail, he's going to be really valuable for me.
Scott, that last if that you brought up for Framber Valdez is probably the biggest caution of mine when it comes to him is the walks, because he has struggled quite a bit with them in the past. I also wonder, if the curveball is not working. His curveball is nasty. It's filthy. Mm-hmm. But if the curveball isn't working, does he have anything else that he can go to? That's something I also worry about with Framber Valdez. But as long as he's healthy, I do think he is going to go deep into his starts.
Yeah. I did want to mention with Bundy too.
Go ahead.
Because we saw his home run rate drop significantly going from the AL East to the AL West, small parks to big parks generally. He's not going to make every start in the AL West this year, of course. And so, I wonder if that's, I have concerns that it's too much is riding on that home run rate and things could go wrong with it pretty quickly. But if the ball is deader this year, then maybe that's not even something to worry about. I know the average length on Dylan Bundy's home runs last year, it makes, I don't remember what it was, but it makes that case stronger too.
Yeah, it depends on how much the growth in the quality of contact skill was real in 2020, because he's always gotten hit pretty hard, and in the air a lot. And the thing for me is he kind of started looking like Dylan Bundy again after those first four starts. First four starts were unbelievably good. 35 strikeouts in 4 starts. It was 28 innings. After that, it was a strikeout per inning, but a 4.62 ERA, with not really an out of control BABIP. It was 3.14.
He allowed 5 home runs all season though. Like the problem for
home
Bundy
runs
before last year
yeah.
was always home runs.
Yeah, no, the home run. I think
He did have a couple. He did have a couple of shaky starts down the stretch.
I just think people are looking at him as like a much better strikeout pitcher than he probably will be.
Okay.
And I think that's like, I think he's probably more like a slightly above average strikeout pitcher. And
if people are looking at him, like more than a slightly above strikeout pitcher, then I think I agree they're making a mistake. But I don't think the ADP would suggest that they're looking at him that way.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't bring myself to draft Dylan Bundy as a top 36 starting pitcher.
Yeah, I'm closer to you there, Chris. I have him as a bust. You can find my bust 2.0 over on the website, cbssports.com. Final 8 starts, you mentioned it, 4.62 ERA, and he stopped using his slider as much. His slider usage went down. It went from 30% in his first 4 starts, 22% over his final 8. And the slider is far and away Bundy's best pitch. But there were starts last year where I was watching it, and he didn't have his slider. And if he doesn't have his slider, it's like his fastball's 90 miles per hour. His changeup is good, but I don't think it's good enough for him to overcome his slider not being on. So that's just what I saw when I watched him pitch a few times down the stretch, and I really didn't like what I saw. So I'm really not a fan of him going in this range as well. The last name in this group is Charlie Morton. I don't know how much he has left at 37 years old. He looked awesome in the postseason, but he also dealt with a shoulder injury earlier in the regular season that affected his production, and it also affected his velocity. So where do you kind of come out here on Charlie Morton, Scott?
Oh, you're going to me. I thought you were going to go to Chris. No, that's fine. Charlie Morton. Okay, so I got to go to Chris because I got a good number I want to find.
Well, Chris,
find it quickly enough.
Where are you on Charlie Morton this season?
I think you can probably guess. He was really, really good before 2020. He had a bad 2020. So I like Charlie Morton more than the consensus. I have him as a top 30 starting pitcher. Injuries are a real concern for a 36, 37-year-old, something like that.
37.
I think the stuff is still good enough, even if his velocity is a little bit diminished. And he'll be pitching in the NL with presumably no DH and great support behind him. So,
yeah, I don't know why I haven't been more enthusiastic about drafting him because I agree with everything you're saying. And
I think it's just the innings. He's one of the few veterans who you don't expect to be a reliable deep pitcher.
All right, so this is the number I wanted to give you. So for the year, Charlie Morton had a 4.74 ERA, 139 WHIP during the regular season, a little more than a strikeout per inning. 4.74, 139, a little more than a strikeout per inning. But after his IL stint for shoulder soreness, if you take his regular season numbers and postseason numbers combined after that IL stint, 3.48 ERA, 123 WHIP, 10.5 K per 9. Basically old Charlie Morton, right? I mean, that WHIP seems a little high, but otherwise really, really high in numbers there.
But we're also, I mean, Chris, you hit on it, but like a 37-year-old with a shoulder injury, it's just, there is a lot of concern there. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter much when his ADP is 116. So, I mean, it's much lower than where he's been in years past, but
if the split was backward, though, it'd be different. If he has served an IL stint for a shoulder surgery and then he comes back and he doesn't look great, then, okay, maybe his shoulder's still messed up. But like the IL stint righted him, which suggests to me the shoulder injury was solved at that point. I mean, obviously he could get hurt again, but it would. I don't really consider that specific injury to be a factor anymore.
Let's wrap up with this final group. It feels like we just started talking. Like, how are we already an hour in this?
Look, I can keep going.
It's crazy, man.
I got water. I'm good.
The next three, these come in rounds 10 and 11. Julio Urias at pick 117, Lance McCullers at pick 125, and Patrick Corbin at pick 127. Chris, Julio Urias, kind of similar, I think, what we're expecting in terms of the workload. Obviously, he pitches for the Dodgers, similar to someone maybe like Jesus Luzardo or Ian Anderson, where we don't really know what we're going to get. The Dodgers have a lot of depth, of course. And Julio Urias was not very good in the regular season. And then he was awesome in the postseason, where he mostly pitched out of the bullpen. So where do you come out on Julio Urias for 2021?
I will be extraordinarily excited about Julio Urias when the Twins trade for him in 2025.
Good answer.
I don't think they're ever going to let him be a normal starting pitcher. I think he's going to be really good while he's out there, but the upside is very capped, despite how good I think he will be. And I think his 3.20 career ERA, tells the story of how good he is.
This feels like the ultimate fool's gold pick at this position, because I see some people who are so excited to draft Julio Urias, and I think they're putting their scout hat on and only looking at the talent itself and not really factoring how the usage is probably going to be for him. And Chris is absolutely right in that regard, especially since they're having to kick Dustin May and Tony Gonsolin out of the rotation. Like, those guys are going to make starts this year, and bumping Urias out from time to time is probably how that's going to happen. Not to mention all the 4-inning outings, the 5-inning outings Urias is probably going to have. It's just, it's not enough reward.
I will add this. I may need to dethrone Kyle Hendricks as the king of the quality of contact. Kingdom? Fiefdom? Kyle Hendricks is at 349 xwOBA contact for his career. xwOBAcon. Julio Urias is 329. So, you look at him and the strikeout rate could be better, but man, he does not get hit hard. And it's a small-ish sample size, but it's been consistent over, roles and seasons.
Since you brought up the strikeout rate, it was awesome in the postseason.
Yeah.
He was overpowering. Urias was in the postseason, which makes me think too, because they have that rotation surplus, might that be his better role for the Dodgers? I mean, it sounds like he has a leg up in the rotation battle, Urias does, but there's so many ways that could go. And I think the outcome where he's just a regular starting pitcher going every 5th day, flirting with 6 innings, I think that's the least likely of the outcomes.
I kind of think it would be fun if he just threw 3 innings every 3rd game.
Yeah. I was say, would it surprise anyone if we wound up with a tandem starting pitcher where he goes 3 or 4 innings and then Dustin May comes in for 3 to 4 innings? I don't think that would surprise anybody.
Nope.
Yeah. I don't know. It would. That's really hard mentally is the only thing I would say. So I don't know if guys are willing to do that for more than a few turns in a rotation, but I think either way, there's not much upside for Urias from an inning standpoint.
If people needed more reasons as to why I am drafting pitching early, you've kind of heard it throughout this entire podcast. There's just not a lot of pitchers that I like going in this range. I had not liked the last group that much. I really don't like this group. Scott, I mean, is there anything that you like about Lance McCullers at pick 125 or Patrick Corbin at 127? McCullers was fine last year. He kind of is the pitcher he's always been, but he has not ever thrown more than 128 innings in a season before. And Patrick Corbin just led the MLB in hits allowed and whip. He had a 1.57 whip. Think about how bad it is for Patrick Corbin.
If Urias is the ultimate fool's gold pick at this position, Corbin is the ultimate boomer bust pick, sink or swim pick, whatever you want to call it. Because and we should know pretty early on if his velocity's back in spring training and his awful year was just a case of strange build up to a strange season, which I think is a viable possibility. But if the velocity is not back in spring training, I'm probably going to be completely out on Patrick Corbin. And if it is back in spring training, I might be moving him up 15 to 20 spots. So that's kind of where I am with him. Chris looks like he wants to say something.
Well, I don't know if the fastball velocity really matters. I remember in 2018 when he got off to that incredible start and he was averaging almost 93 miles per hour with his fastball. And then his fastball velocity cratered. He averaged 89.5 miles per hour in May. And I remember saying like, oh, this is a warning sign. He's either going to get hurt or be less effective. And, he got back to 92 by the end of the season, but for the most part, he wasn't throwing particularly hard and it didn't matter.
So he dropped to 89 that year. What did he drop to last year?
90.
Okay. So about, well, he was terrible. He was terrible. And the biggest difference seemed to be the fastball velocity. So
the fastball was just much less effective overall.
And it kind of, it made everything play down. I mean, his swinging strike rate went from 14% in 2019. It was 10.6%. I mean, that is a huge drop. So
I did want to comment on McCullers though. I actually think he's kind of post hype right now and being undervalued, especially after he got back to featuring his curveball about 50% of the time last year. Coming off injury, he seemed reluctant to throw it that much, but he started throwing it that way again. And like we've always seen good strikeout rates from him. We've always seen elite ground ball rates from him. It's been a durability issue, clearly, but I think the best is yet to come from McCullers, and I value him about on the level of like a Jesus Luzardo, a little behind that, but about on that level.
I don't think there's much difference between Lance McCullers and Dinelson Lamet.
That's probably fair to say. I will say if you draft McCullers as your SP4, SP5, for me, I would hope he's my SP5, but just, make sure that your other pitchers are safer for innings pitched, because I mean, again, we just haven't seen him throw more than 128 in his career. So, even if you want to project optimistically for McCullers, it's probably 150, I would say. So just keep that in mind when drafting one Lance McCullers. All right, we're going to wrap there. Didn't get to as many starting pitchers as I wanted to, but again, next week we'll have our relief pitcher preview on Monday, and then Tuesday we'll do a little bit of a position preview recap of everything, and we'll also hit on the rest of the starting pitchers that we didn't get to today. We'll also have a mailbag that's coming out this Saturday in the feed. So if you've asked a question recently via email or Apple Podcast review, make sure you listen to that podcast. Or if you just want to listen to it to support us anyway, we would appreciate it. All right, so for Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thank you all for listening and watching Fantasy Baseball today. We'll be back again on Monday. Bye-bye.